upon a time infested or infected you and me.
Do you think that the media today should bear some responsibility on the increase of gun violence and the bizarre ways that people are just getting their 15 minutes of fame, which now goes on for days and days and days?
Well, the difficulty is that if the media didn't cover this, we'd be blinding ourselves in one eye, and we certainly can't solve this problem without knowing about it. However, it does have the negative effect that you're implying, which is it sets up a ritual pattern. And so we've seen the same ritual enacted in Colorado, in Connecticut, in Santa Barbara, over and over and over again. It's always lonely people who are in terrible pain from their isolation, who often have emotional problems that therapists simply can't reach, or whose depth the therapists don't even recognize. None of his therapists knew that he was obsessed with guns. His parents apparently didn't know that he was obsessed with guns. So right now there is no psychology that can x-ray people's minds and see through to it. But there are things that can be done about something like the killings in Lahore and the Sudan, where it's been not only ritualized, that killing has not only been ritualized, it has been accepted as a part of a going way of running a society. And one of the things that Barack Obama said today, and it's terribly culturally colonialistic, is that if we spread America's values of human rights, things like the gross horror in Lahore will not happen. And he is right. And he does say America has to continue in its leadership role.
But wait a sec, Howard. But wait a sec.
Yeah.
How can the President of the United States talk for the rest of the world?
Well, because the rest of the world, whenever something happens, this is a point he makes in his speech today, when there are problems in Egypt, when there are earthquakes, or when there's a hurricane in the Philippines, no matter what the catastrophe, people all over the world, with the possible exception of China, expect the Americans to show up and do something. And you can see that in interviews that newscasters get when they go overseas, or journalists get when they go overseas and interview the local population. The local population wants to know why isn't America here yet? Why isn't America saving us? And that the president associates that with American exceptionalism. I would like to continue to lead the world. I think that we have a tremendous amount to offer to the rest of the world. I think we have to stop stomping out hundreds of thousands of people to get rid of a substantial irritation, as we did in Iraq and as we did in Afghanistan. I do think we have to get smarter about how we do these things. And I do think that we have to do our best to spread our values, even though, and the President said this today, sometimes we have to accept allies who we do not approve of, like we're about to have a military dictatorship in Egypt. The voting has been going on over the weekend for al-Sisi, who is the military head, who is looking for a big he's looking for a big turnout. He got a very small turnout. The enthusiasm for him was not what he expected. So he kept the voting polls, the voting booths, open for an extra day, hoping to get more votes, so he could say that he really has a mandate. Well, he doesn't have a mandate. He has taken over, and it's going to be another military dictatorship. But the president pointed out in his speech, which had many good points, that for the sake of stability in the Middle East, we need him as an ally. So we're going to be stuck with him. But in the long run, what would we like to do? We'd like to see human rights everywhere there can be, because the fact is that under the regime of human rights, under the sort of humanitarian values that the West has been developing since 1650, the rate of violence in the world has gone down by a factor of 9 since 1650.
All right, now I understand that the president wants to spread the will and to go forward with human rights, but I would love to ask the president if the United States Armed Forces will stop using depleted uranium munition, which is in direct violation of the United Nations Charter. So how can the President of the United States say one thing and then allow his troops to violate the United Nations rules, regulations on the other hand? How can the President of the United States, who's only going to be in power for 2 more years, be possibly setting up another catastrophe by imposing the will of the great United States on other countries who really don't give a damn?
Well, let's take a look at the situation. The South China Sea, we've talked about the fact in the past that the Chinese have claimed their rights over 1.35 million square miles of the South China Sea. One of the difficulties in the South China Sea that's been taking place over the last week is that the Chinese towed an oil rig. Oil rigs are huge, Rob.
They sure are.
Skyscrapers. And they towed an oil rig into a territory that Vietnam claims, and they planted it there. And the Vietnamese people were so upset that they started burning down Chinese factories, which is not a great idea. I don't advocate that. But China is taking its chances on taking other people's territory. In the last 48 hours, Chinese fighter jets scrambled and dogged two Japanese surveillance planes. And you know that over the course of the last 2 years, the Chinese government has been encouraging its people to hate the Japanese. And the result has been that people on China Weibo, which is China's equivalent of Twitter, often go on saying, why aren't we making more with the Japanese already? We should be doing it. Well, that's not a good attitude to inculcate in your people. And when you have military planes from Japan facing off against military planes from China, that's not a good thing. The reason that those military jets from China scrambled is that the Chinese military was holding joint exercises in the South China Sea with the Russians. And they did not want the two planes from Japan were surveillance planes.
Right.
And they didn't want their military maneuvers to be observed. But what does that show you about the pushiness of China in the South China Sea and the interest of Japan in defending what it feels is its territory? So we do have these situations where Japan depends on the United States, the Philippines, whose territory that they claim is also being taken in the middle of the sea by the Chinese. They even the Vietnamese, our former enemies, they all expect America to back them. Otherwise, China will just continue expanding by little increment after little increment, the way that it expanded by not such a little increment when it invaded Tibet and took the entire country over and started basically removing the Tibetan culture and replacing Tibetans with Han Chinese.
All right, my friend, stand by. You and I have to take our news break at the bottom of the hour. Exonation, Howard Bloom is our special guest. www.howardbloom.net. And Howard, what's the name of that ebook that you have about somebody in a desert?
The Muhammad Code. And the Muhammad Code is vital reading if you want to understand the Mali kidnapping of the girls.
All right, we'll talk about that on the other side of this break as well.
Right.
Howard Bloom, www.howardbloom.net. Howard and I will be back on the other side of this news break. Don't go away. Are you considering calling a psychic to read your situation? Then consider David Champion, a psychic medium for more than 20 years with thousands of readings under his belt. David Champion will make you feel comfortable. He has proven to be honest and accurate. He's a straight shooter. There's no guesswork. What he sees is what you get. While he is a medium, most of the calls focus on relationships, not only love, but work, school, neighbors, and more. Need help with finding a job and preparing for the interview? Are you dealing with people who are obstacles in your path? For more information, go to davidchampion.com, $1.50 per minute paid by credit card with a minimum of 30 minutes. For your reading with David Champion, call 1-877-702-8598. That's 1-877-702-8598. Now you can dial in to listen to the X-Zone Radio Show from anywhere in the world with Rob McConnell 24/7, 365 by dialing 213-401-0080. That's 213-401-0080. If you have a mobile phone or landline, the X-Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell is now at your beck and call at 213-401-0080. That's 213-401-0080, 24/7, 365.
This is the X-Zone Broadcast Network, broadcasting worldwide on broadcast affiliates and satellite program providers, including CNN Broadcast Network, Sirius Satellite Network, Star Media, Good News Radio Network, Angel Broadcast Network, Wiki Broadcast Network, and WPBN TV. For more information on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, visit us at www.xzbn.net.
Howard Bloom is my special guest, X-Zone www.howardbloom.net. And Howard, before we went to the news, you kind of did a bit of a teaser there, my friend. You've been hanging around me too long. Where you just kind of touched very lightly on the Boko Haram and what happened in Nigeria.
Well, the Nigerian kidnapping, if you read my book, The Muhammad Code, which has been called by the lifestyle editor at PJ Media, he says it's the best book he's ever read on Islam. It reads like a horror novel, and it's the most elegantly written book on Islam he's ever read. In other words, it's fun to read. You can understand it. And it tells you that to be a good Muslim, you are supposed to follow in the footsteps of Muhammad. You are supposed to follow his example in all things. Well, if you read the book, you will understand why this kidnapping of 200 girls makes sense. It isn't good, it's bad, it's evil. But you'll see where it comes from, because Muhammad treated women as loot. He treated women as booty. He treated women, any woman you capture, is you can possess her by the right hand. That means you can rape her. You can have any form of sex you want with her. You can sell her as a slave. That's something Muhammad himself did. He killed men, took their wives and daughters as property and divided them up according to the laws that are given in the 8th chapter of the Quran, which is called the loot, the booty. So what the leader of Boko Haram is doing seems insane to us, and I would certainly like it to be insane in this world, but he is not living in our world. He is living in the world of 7th century, of Muhammad's 7th century. However, Islam demands that you live in that world. Now, many friends, my friends, who are Muslims and who are moderate and who are modernist and pluralists, do not take that approach to Islam. Not at all. They're defining Islam in a whole different way. But traditional Islam is the Islam of the leader of Boko Haram. And it is that aspect of Islam, militant Islam, jihadist Islam, is something, well, the president recognized in his speech today that it's the biggest enemy that we've got in the world, although he's wrong. China is a major threat, and Russia is a bit of a problem.
Yeah.
So we have several different enemies, but you asked, why is America necessary? Why should America be meddling in the world? When Nigeria has a problem with Boko Haram, they call on the United States for help. When the Philippines lose an entire city to a hurricane, they call on the United States for help. When the Ukrainians get into a bind with Russia, they call on the Americans for help. These people expect our help. When the Arab Springs were breaking forth, the people in the streets demonstrating were calling for American help. So it isn't just by our choice or by our arrogance and our imperialism that we are involved in world affairs. Things work best in this world. There is peace when there is what the Chinese like to call a hegemon, when there is a ruling state that is in charge of the peace. So we had a Pax Romana under the Romans for hundreds of years that produced incredible benefits for Europe. It enriched Europe tremendously, all of Europe. We had a Pax Britannica when the British ruled their empire, when the sun never set on the British Empire, from the time of the defeat of Napoleon at Waterloo until the 1870s and going on up until 1913 when we had World War I. So a peace that is established and enforced by one dominant superpower is something that has benefited the rest of the world in past times tremendously. And you know that the Chinese want to be the next superpower. The Chinese adopted a phrase from George Bush the Elder, which is the New World Order. And they have a New World Order up their sleeve. They use that phrase a lot. And they say in that New World Order there will be no hegemon. That means there will be no United States.